I think it's a possibility Stafford wins this, because if he doesn't get it this year, he may not ever get it. He's 37. Welcome to Just the Stats, NFL Top 10's for Wednesday. My name's Ernie Jennings, and today we are going to talk about some awards that are coming up here in the near future. Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, and Most Valuable Player. I was going to include Rookie of the Year and Coach of the Year, but I think I'll put that off to another podcast because it's just too much to put into a podcast. I'm going to try to keep this closer to 30 minutes than I have been. But also, there's a lot going on with the coaches. So instead of just doing like a top 10 coaches, I wanted to look at the top 10 coaches as far as most wins among active coaches, coaches that have been fired, coaches that are possibly going to be making it a new appearance somewhere else, either as a first-time coach or as a returning coach from one team to a next. So there's a lot going on with the coaches. And then with the Rookie of the Year, we'll look at that as well separately, just for time's sake mostly, and maybe probably next week, actually. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to try to get into some stats and some looks at some of the things about the games coming up this weekend for the playoffs. So we'll cover that tomorrow. But today, what we're going to do is start with the Defensive Player of the Year. Now, I know what you're thinking already. It's Myles Garrett. Everybody knows that, and that's true. Besides him, there were some other good players, and that obviously didn't quite make it to his level, but still had good seasons. So I wanted to mention them. Now, I won't go through all 10 of these because I want to move on to the Offensive Player of the Year. And honestly, I'm not as equipped to talk about the defensive players as the offensive players. If you're in fantasy football, unless you have where you're picking defensive players, even then, you're just kind of looking at numbers. But I'll just cover a few of them. And it's really a hard thing to do anyway with Defensive Players of the Year because numbers often stand out. So obviously Myles Garrett is the guy. But below him, you have some people like even Micah Parsons would have had a good season probably if he'd have been around. Will Anderson Jr., Houston Texans. Man, he's good, and he's young too. He really had a good year. He had 20 tackles for loss, which is a really good amount of tackles for loss. And he also had 12 sacks. So that all around is a pretty good season for him. And if you watch the playoff games, he's very impressive. And between him and Daniel Hunter, honestly, those two players could both be candidates for Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, Daniel Hunter had 15 sacks and 15 tackles for loss. So they kind of flip-flopped there. So two of those players are really good. Then you have somebody like Aiden Hutchinson. He was really good as well. And he had 14 tackles for loss this year. And he had 14 and a half sacks. So he had a good season as well. He's just a good edge rusher. And for him, he needs to be able to stay completely healthy for the entire year. And he might have a chance. Now, somebody that I've watched quite a bit and I really did like was Max Crosby. Max Crosby had 10 sacks. He missed the last game of the season. So when you take that out of the equation, he actually missed 2 games. And so he had 10 sacks, but he had 28 tackles for loss. And I talked about this before if you've heard my podcast. Honestly, he's incredible. He'd be the only person that would have anything near Myles Garrett as far as votes go. And Max Crosby would be the clear number 2 in this Defensive Player of the Year. But he plays almost every down. he constantly is pressuring the quarterback, and he just produced all year long. And the thing about it is he's one of the only good players on the Raiders defense. So there's a lot of focus on him, and yet he still puts up some really good numbers. It's just incredible how well he plays and how consistently. Like I said, he missed 2 games. Who knows what his numbers would have been if he'd have played every game. He had 46 quarterback pressures. Like I said, he had 28 tackles for loss. 28 tackles for loss, by the way, is good enough for 4th all-time in NFL history as far as tackles for loss go. So he had an incredible year. And like I said, throw in 10 sacks as well, and in 15 games. The Raiders just paid him a lot of money, and it's well worth it. One of the few good players on the Raiders. Now, of course, Myles Garrett's the guy. We can talk about the sacks, but in tackles for loss, we'll just talk about that. 33 tackles for loss. That is good enough to be 2nd all-time in NFL history for tackles for loss. That's incredible. 7 quarterback pressures this year. And then to top it off, he had 23 sacks. Again, he was somebody that the other team would focus on heavily, and he still was able to rack up 23 sacks, which is the NFL record for sacks in a single season. So he will easily win the Defensive Player of the Year. You have 10 candidates or whatever they have, but it's just going to be Myles Garrett, and then I think for sure that Max Crosby will come in 2nd. And after that, who knows? But Myles Garrett will clearly be the winner of the Defensive Player of the Year, and he well deserves it. I still can't get over when he got that last sack against Cincinnati. It's like you could just see the pressure that was mounting on him the whole game, because it was down to the last 4 or 5 minutes before he finally got that sack that gave him the record. And you knew it. You knew he was feeling the pressure to get the sack, because, time is running out of the last game of the season. It was really something to see him when he got the sack. And you know what? He'll be showing up pretty quickly here in all-time numbers. Probably the end of next season, he'll start showing up in the all-time sacks and tackles for loss numbers. All right, let's move on to NFL Offensive Player of the Year candidates. And again, it usually comes down to 1 or 2 players, but I'll go through some of these players a little bit closer for this thing. I like these players, and for different reasons, you can see why they might be considered Offensive Player of the Year. But we'll start from the bottom up. Trey McBride, number 10, Arizona Cardinal tight end, really had an exceptional season. He was one of the few players on the team, as far as receivers go, that was there in and out all year. And the fact that Arizona had no running game, there was ability to put more pressure on Trey McBride, and yet he still produced 126 receptions for 1,239 yards and 11 touchdowns. And also, he had 1 drop on 169 targets. That's incredible. 1 drop on 169 targets. So he really had an impressive year. Number 9, James Cook for the Buffalo Bills running back. He was rushing leader for the year with 1,621 yards. He overtook Jonathan Taylor, who had the lead for the first half of the season, and then James Cook kept chipping away and caught him with a couple of games to go. He also had, James Cook did, 1,912 yards from scrimmage. He had 12 touchdowns. He averaged 5.2 yards per carry. So really good there too. Over 5 yards a carry. You know what? I honestly didn't think he'd put up these kinds of numbers because of the year before. They didn't use him this year the same way as last year. This year, they relied on him a lot more. Last year, he didn't have nearly the amount of carries he had this year. But I think between him wanting his new contract, which he got, and saying, I can handle more, he was able to take on more and really had a good season. Number 8 is Jonathan Taylor. And again, his season kind of was unbelievable the first half. And that was when Jones was the quarterback. And also, I don't know, I'll just stick with the fact that Jones was the quarterback and go from there. But the second half of the season, when he went out and the opposing defenses were able to focus more on Taylor, it made it a lot more difficult for him. James Cook didn't have this problem because James Cook has the advantage of having Josh Allen as his quarterback. So it makes it much more difficult for a team to focus on him the way they could on Jonathan Taylor. But Jonathan Taylor ended up with 1,585 yards rushing, which was second most, actually third most, because Derrick Henry passed him by 4 yards. But Jonathan Taylor had 20 touchdowns, averaged 4.9 yards a carry, and he actually had more scrimmage yards than James Cook did. He ended up with 1,963 yards from scrimmage. So excellent season for him. Number 7, Jahmyr Gibbs. Honestly, a good season, but again, it's another season that petered out a little bit toward the end. Had over 1,800 yards from scrimmage, over 1,200 yards rushing, much more of a run-pass threat, over 600 yards receiving as well, 18 touchdowns, and he averaged 5 yards a carry. Number 6, Drake May. Only Drake May and Matthew Stafford are on this list as quarterbacks. This has become an award that is handed out more so to offensive players who aren't quarterbacks. It's kind of has to be that way because MVP is basically quarterback. Some other player would have to have incredible record-breaking, all-time record-breaking year as a running back or a receiver to be a candidate for for MVP, that is. So they kind of have almost made this offensive player of the year a non-quarterback. But Drake May is number 6. He had ended the season with almost 4,400 yards passing. He had 31 touchdowns with 8 interceptions. 72% completion rate, which is awesome. And 113.5 quarterback rating, which was the highest of anybody. So he was impressive, to say the least, And I say all that, he's only a second-year quarterback. Isn't that amazing? Led the NFL in completion percentage, like I said, was 72%, and quarterback rating. Just an incredible quarterback, and he can run too. He had a good amount of rushing yards as well. Number 5 is Matthew Stafford, just above him. And these two are the two battling it out for MVP as well. Matthew Stafford's number 5. He had over 4,700 yards passing, which is a little more than 300 more than Drake May. He had 46 touchdowns passing to only 8 interceptions, whereas Drake May had 31 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. And he had a quarterback rating of 109.2, which is quite high as well. Not quite as high as Drake May. He was second to Drake May as far as quarterback rating goes. Another incredible year for Matthew Stafford, probably one of his best. And considering the fact, unlike Drake May, who's in his second year, Matthew Stafford's been around a while. He's in his mid to late 30s. So what a contrast. But two great players, and it's a contrast in many ways. Matthew Stafford is not a runner, but he's got a rifle for an arm and just knows how to pick a defense apart. Drake May, on the other hand, can run around and find the open guy because he makes time for himself to find the open guy when there isn't one initially. And then, or Drake May will just take off running. So they're both really great players, which kind of makes it difficult between the two because they're not just identical type of players. So you're having to look at two players and see how they would be differently. Number 4, Christian McCaffrey for the 49ers. He had over 2,100 yards from scrimmage, 1,200 yards rushing, 900 yards, over 900 yards receiving, had 17 touchdowns total, and was just an amazing player. I mean, for his team, he carried this team when players kept going in and out. Kittle's out. All the wide receivers, one or the other was out at any one time. Just never anybody on offense that was consistent was except for Christian McCaffrey. And what's funny about this is he's the oldest, running back, one of the older players on the team. And if you're into fantasy football, the question about whether you wanted to draft Christian McCaffrey was, is he going to stay healthy? That was the question. And he stayed healthy the entire year, while everybody around him on offense was not. So a great player, over, like I said, 2,100 yards from scrimmage. And, when you compare that, say, to Cook or Jonathan Taylor, neither one had over 2,000. So a big difference there. But even better than Christian McCaffrey was the number 3 player, Bijan Robinson, for the Atlanta Falcons, running back for them. He had almost 2 yards short of 2,300 yards from scrimmage. For a while, it was Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor were humming along as the number 1 and 2 players as far as total scrimmage yards, going back and forth. Well, their season started to peter out a little bit, and Bijan Robinson just kept chugging away. He had a great season for a team that just couldn't get it all together, and maybe if their quarterback is the same quarterback all year round, next year with Penix, that might be different. But like I said, Bijan Robinson, 2,300 yards from scrimmage, 1,478 yards rushing, over 800 yards receiving. Just an incredible player. 11 touchdowns total. Very impressive. All right, now we come to the top 2 players. That's Puka Nacua is number 2 here, wide receiver for the Rams. And then number 1 is Jackson Smith-Njigba for the Seattle Seahawks, wide receiver. I'm just going to kind of look at these two guys together because I was looking at this. These two players are so similar in a lot of ways. Now, Puka Nacua played one less game. I honestly think he would be the offensive player of the year if it hadn't been for that fact. So let's look at this. Jackson Smith-Njigba, 119 receptions. Puka Nacua, 129, so 10 more receptions. But Jackson Smith-Njigba had 1,793 yards to 1,715 yards for Puka Nacua. So he beat him out by 78 yards. He also averaged 15.1 yards a reception. That's Smith-Njigba did, while Puka Nacua averaged 13.3. So a little bit better there for Njigba. They both had 10 touchdowns. Just incredible players. Puka Nacua, though, the big difference with him is he takes a hit a little bit more. They're two different, little bit styles are completely different. Again, this is something like Stafford and May as far as quarterbacks, but this is receivers. Smith-Njigba's fast, can cut on a dime. They both can catch really well. Puka Nacua is a good route, not good. He's a superb route runner, as is Jackson Smith-Njigba, but he's not quite as fast as Jackson is, and doesn't have quite the same moves, but they're both excellent players in their own right. You hate to even compare them sometimes. But right now, Jackson Smith-Njigba is the top guy. And you're looking at his stats here again. Both of them first team All-Pro. Jackson Smith-Njigba led the NFL in 10-plus yard plays with 79 of those, and in 40-plus yard plays, 8 of those. The other thing that's big about him, and which is why he's maybe the number one candidate, is he got 50% of the passing yards were caught by Jackson Smith-Njigba for the team, for the Seattle Seahawks. 50.1% of the team air yards, it was to Jackson Smith-Njigba. Everybody else was kind of an afterthought on that team. So he was incredible, which obviously means that every other team, you would think, was trying to keep him, in check, but it was not easy to do. In fact, it was very difficult to do. So he just dominated for his team in receptions, was the key guy for their offense. One of those situations where the offense really did kind of run around him. As far as Puka Nacua, like I said, led the NFL in receptions, second in yards. He had 449 yards over expected, meaning that, what a typical pass would get by a typical receiver, he was able to get 449 yards more than that. Incredible. And he did miss a game, like I said. So these are two great players. Right now, the odds makers are saying Smith-Njigba is going to get it, and he probably will. And he deserves it. I mean, both these players are superb. Puka Nacua's season took off in the second half. Smith-Njigba was consistent throughout the year. Number 3 will be Bijan Robinson. They'll be the top 3 easily. After that, I don't know who will be 4th. It could be Christian McCaffrey, or it could be somebody else. But those are your top 3 players and your top 10, looking at those. All right, now looking at the MVP. This to me, I'm not even a complete fan of this award because of the fact that you're saying that if this person wasn't on your team would not be as good, obviously. But this is why it's dominated by quarterbacks. There's only 3 players on my list that are not quarterbacks. But I don't know how to look at it. So right now, for example, I got Matthew Stafford at number 1, Drake Mays number 2. These are going to be the 2 guys. So is it saying that, for example, let me go down to number 3. Odds makers have Trevor Lawrence possibly coming in 3rd for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's because the last 6 games of the year, Trevor Lawrence had the best stats in the NFL. Most touchdowns, fewest interceptions, a quarterback rating that was superb. But it was just that it was a shorter period of time. It was like the last 6 games of the year versus the first half of the year. He wasn't even in the conversation. And it didn't come to the last 6 games of the year that Trevor Lawrence started showing up in the conversation. But I only bring him up because is it saying that if Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, the team would tank? And that's truly the case because the backup quarterback for the Jaguars is, you might as well do kind of what Indianapolis Colts did when you went out and tried to pick up somebody. He's not that great. So I can see that. So now when you're looking at Matthew Stafford and Drake May, are we saying that if they weren't the quarterback and they put in their backup, the team would just fall completely apart? Maybe so, but would it fall apart as much as it would for somebody like Trevor Lawrence? So this is what I'm saying. How do you gauge this honestly? Or are you saying, what if Drake May and Matthew Stafford switched teams? Would the Rams have a better record than they did? Or would the Patriots have a better record than they had with Drake May? I don't know. I find it very difficult to gauge. Probably why I like stats, because stats just tell you all of everything. But I don't know. Right now, it's Matthew Stafford and Drake May who are the top 2 players. And deservedly so. I don't think there's really anybody, like I said, Trevor Lawrence is 3rd, but that's a distance 3rd. And whether he even finishes in 3rd or 4th or whatever number, it doesn't matter. It's going to be Matthew Stafford or Drake May. And looking at their numbers, like I said, comparing their numbers, Matthew Stafford had over 4,700 yards passing. That led the NFL. 46 touchdowns led the NFL by 14. I mean, he crushed everybody else. Only 8 interceptions, completed 65% of his passes, 109.2 passer rating, which was second to Drake May. And he led the team to one of the best offenses in the best offense in the NFL as far as numbers go. So, and he's 37. That's the interesting thing about this. It's just incredible. He had a 40, like I said, a 46-8 TD to interception ratio, which is extremely good. So as far as the MVP, as anybody else could have got those passes that he got to the receivers, that's the question. I just can't answer that. How do you know until you put a quarterback in the same situation from a different team? And looking at Drake May, almost 4,400 yards passing, which was fourth best, 31 touchdowns, which is third best, had 8 interceptions, the same as Stafford, led the NFL in quarterback completion percentage of 72%, had a quarterback rating, like I said, of 113.5, which is led the NFL. In quarterback rating, he had a 77.2, which is another way to gauge quarterbacks, which was the highest in the NFL. He had 450 rushing yards as well. He had 4 rushing touchdowns. So if you think about it, that's along with his 31 other touchdowns. He had a total of 35 touchdowns. And he led the Patriots to a 14-3 record. And he's only been in only his second year. He's amazing, to be honest with you. I think he's going to be a great player. I mean, among many of these second-year quarterbacks. So those are your top 2 players. And one of them will win the award. Who it is, I can't say. Bo Nix is another candidate, but, this is just a deep shot kind of thing. He's been incredible for his team. I think he's really grasping between him and Sean Payton. I look at Bo Nix, by the way, as somebody that Sean Payton can work with, just like he did with Drew Brees. They're not the same exact type of quarterback, obviously, but somebody that in and out, season in, season out, the two of them working together will have an incredible offense every year. Other players, the only players that are on this list that are not quarterbacks was Jackson Smith-Njigba and Christian McCaffrey. And that's because, like I mentioned about Jackson Smith-Njigba, over 50%, or 50.1% of the air yards were to Smith-Njigba. He was the guy that the team looked at. The quarterback was looking at almost every chance he had. And then Christian McCaffrey, obviously, not because he had the most yards, and this is what makes it kind of interesting, but offensively, players are dropping all around him. Had different quarterbacks playing for him as well. So quarterback was changing. Tight ends were changing all the time. Receivers were changing all the time. The only constant was Christian McCaffrey, who was trailed and followed and chased down by every defender on every play. And yet he produced close to 2,200 yards of offense. Would he not be considered somebody that, if he was not on the team, would this team have gotten anywhere near the playoffs? They made the playoffs with that kind of a team. I think that falls on Christian McCaffrey. Carried this team on his shoulders and all the way to the playoffs, and actually had the upset in the playoffs as well over the Eagles. So incredible season for him. Josh Allen's on this list, of course. Not the same year he had last year when he did win the MVP. A few more turnovers, not as many yards. Still, though, he's the catalyst that runs that team. And without him, what would happen to the Buffalo Bills? Who knows? And then the only other player that I had that was not a quarterback was Myles Garrett. I put him on here because he did set the NFL record for sacks, second best record in tackles for loss. And their defense was what kept them in games and helped them actually win games when their offense was next to nothing most of the season. So Myles Garrett, was probably the key catalyst to that team winning any games. That, the few games that they did win, it was due to Myles Garrett as one of the main reasons for that. So if you want to look at it like that, how many games do they win if Myles Garrett's not even on the field? 0? Who knows? But he's not an offensive player, so he won't win it, but I put him on the list anyway. Okay, that's a look at some of the players. MVP will be Stafford or May, for sure, one of those two. Offensive player will be Jackson Smith-Njigba or Puka Nacua, probably Smith-Njigba. This other one, back to it's really close, honestly, between Stafford and May. Depending on how you want to look at it, May had a better year than Stafford in some ways, and Stafford had a better year in other ways. To be honest, because I don't think this is just a stats thing. I think it also goes on just the sentiment of the people picking this category, just like last year when Lamar Jackson had numbers that just were topped Josh Allen in almost every way you could look at it statistically. But Josh Allen had won the MVP the year before and the year before that. They didn't want to give it to him again. So Josh Allen, I felt that was one of the primary reasons he got it. Now, I could be completely wrong. And if you ask them, the people who voted, they'd say no. Josh Allen was the more valuable player for his team. And that could be the case. But I still think some things like that play a part. So I say that because I think it's a possibility Stafford wins this. Because if he doesn't get it this year, he may not ever get it. He's 37. This is his best year, and it's his best chance to get it. Drake May is only in his second year, and so he has got more time to get this award down the road. Now, whether that should play a part in it, I personally don't think so, but I'm just thinking, how do these people who make the vote, how are they thinking? So we'll see what happens and see if I'm proven wrong on that. All right. And then we all know that Myles Garrett will win Defensive Player of the Year. All right. That's a wrap. Appreciate you listening. If you feel that you didn't like my top 10, I don't think anybody can quibble too much with who's going to win the award. Maybe if you might quibble with who I have on the list or didn't include on the list. But feel free to leave a comment and I'll read it, comment back, negative or not. And I'll always be nice and will consider what you have to say. And even if I think you're right, I'll let you know. But you can find this podcast on Just the Stats NFL on YouTube. You can watch it there. You'll see the top 10 I put up for each of these categories as well. And you can also listen to it, of course, on all your podcast favorite locations, Spotify, Apple, or whatever app you might use. I appreciate all the new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. And I'm looking forward to, as I have a little bit more time, of putting in a lot more improvements into the podcast. And so I'm excited about that. Excited for this. I'm already excited for the next year of doing this podcast. So this was my first year. It's what a change. If you happen to listen to the first podcast to the last one, which probably not that many of you have, it has changed considerably from start to finish. So it's a work in progress. All right. Thanks for listening. And so for NFL Top 10s for Wednesday, I'm out. I'll see you tomorrow.